I've heard about the story for many years since Monster Quest is when I actually got on board with the story. So, have you come across any other person or persons that have tried to do something similar to this hoax?
Not on that scale, and I have to also say that really, I think in the high 90s percentage of people who contact me and most other researchers, they're really believable and sincere, and not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. But there are always those few that you have to watch for. And it does happen, but nobody's ever, that I know of, put anything so well orchestrated, and edited and persistent about as this one. Normally, it's like somebody will get some kind of I know of three that were on Bray Road particularly. One was actually a county official, not in law enforcement, but in another capacity, whom I knew, who got a gorilla suit and just thought it would be funny to kind of jump out of the corn now and then. Another one was a resident on Bray Road who was sick of people parking on his property, got a bear suit and started, crawling up to people's cars and then knocking on the window and scaring them half to pieces. And then there were a couple of teenage boys who got hold of some werewolf masks and they just kind of popped out of the corn. But it's really hard to fool anybody with those kinds of things if there's any good lighting at all, because they just look like humans in suits. I've had so many photographs sent to me where that's the case. And the other thing is that none of those hoaxes matched up with sightings that I had. So, and also the sightings went back way before anybody knew about it or wrote about it. They went back at least into I think the earliest one I have by Bray Road itself was in 1981.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody was doing any hoaxes back then. So, but there are people who try, and you always have to, if you're a researcher, you always have to keep that in the back of your mind, disappointing as that may sound. But I think we all try our best not to put anything out there that has any hint of deception.
Okay. Well, since you have been researching all these cryptids, and I understand that you have helped a neighbor of yours for a number of years research some paranormal cryptid activity on their farm, are you still doing that kind of work?
Yeah, he's actually he's not my close neighbor, but he is a neighbor of many people who live on Bray Road. He's right out in that vicinity. And he has a 40-some acre hayfield that he bought because he keeps horses in Illinois, and he's a retired math and physics teacher from Illinois. Very, very smart and intelligent man. Never knew anything about cryptids. And after he bought this property, happened to have like a carcass of a dead raccoon out there and a badger, I think, too. And noticed they seemed to be mutilated. He said the raccoon looked like there was a little zipper under its chin and something just unzipped it right down the front. And then the innards were taken out and neatly laid in a pile next to it, which never happens in nature. Usually when small animals like that die, all the opportunistic other animals that aren't even usually carnivores will come, plus vultures and things like that, turkey vultures, will come and get their pieces. And there's just this mass of entrails and bones and things. This wasn't like that. And he told one of his neighbors about it, and they said, well, hey, don't you know that you live where the Beast of Bray Road is? And he said, what's the Beast of Bray Road? And soon after that, he called me and asked if I would like to come out and see some of the things that he'd been finding. And, of course, I was more than happy to do that. And he was starting to carry on experiments that very legally he was taking deer carcasses from that he would find in Illinois and transporting them in his own truck to his own property in Wisconsin. He's had to stop that because the laws changed because of chronic wasting disease. But then, that's what he was doing. This was just a few years ago. It really hasn't been all that long that this has been going on. But he started noticing, for instance, the first deer that he put out was a 60-pound carcass. And he laid it in some kind of tall grass, but you could see the legs sticking out and that sort of thing. And he had a couple of trail cams set to watch it. And he thought, well, if something comes to mutilate this thing, I'm going to see what it is. Well, it did come, but he didn't see it because what happened was at a certain point, and this was daylight, this sort of amorphous, but yet distinct from the background, misty cloud form, almost like a pillar, formed right over the carcass, so that you couldn't see the legs or anything sticking out. It was there for about half an hour. I think he got like 90 shots of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something was triggering this heat and motion sensor on his trail cam. And then after that time period, all of a sudden, the next frame, it was completely clear. The mist was gone, and so was the deer. There was nothing there. It had been picked up. He could see footprints that looked kind of like canine prints, but only the rear ones, except they were quite deep into the ground, which told him whatever it was carrying away this 60-pound deer, and somehow went over or through a barbed wire fence into the neighbor's field. He and this gentleman, and his name is Lee Hampel, and a companion, went through that, followed the tracks as best they could through that cornfield until they hit a road, and then they couldn't see where they went anymore. And that was when he started to get really, really creeped out, because that's just not business as normal in southeastern Wisconsin, for sure. So he, I think, did a total of 18 different carcasses before he had to quit. And I went out and helped him place them, evaluate what happened, because different things would happen to almost all. It was like these, whatever was doing this was enjoying being creative. And there were other things. He had really bizarre light forms, some that resembled the Skinwalker Ranch orange portals that you see in that book. Mm-hmm. He had just one of them was quite a large carcass, and something had taken hold of the head and twisted the head off. You can see the twist marks on the neck, and he took that what was left of it to a butcher is what I meant to say. I think my mind is channeling that old children's nursery rhyme. Took it to a butcher, and he said, "What would you have to do in order to get this effect? To cut this off? Because it was quite a large deer." And he said, "Well, you'd have to have a chopping block and a big butcher knife." So I said to Roy, or Leroy is his name actually. I said to Lee, if you've got a chopping block and someone in your field with a chopping block and a butcher knife, you've got bigger problems, than possible upright wolf-like creatures, and he agreed. But that was just one of them. We found other different types of prints, just very strange things, and they're still going on. It's not to the degree that it was since he had to stop bringing the deer carcasses. And by the way, he also worked with the Department of Natural Resources. He had several of their agents out a couple of times to his farm to show them what he was doing and find out their opinions. And they just said, "Boy, we don't know," or they'd come up with some, unusual explanation that didn't seem like it could apply at all.
Well, that actually, I have heard stories like that here where I live in Southwest Virginia on the border of Kentucky, of actually an older man that is retired forestry officer that has been tracking Bigfoot for most of his career on the side as being a forestry ranger. So yeah, that is insane. So one of the other things that I just recently started doing podcasting at the request of our mutual friend Dark Waters. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I have come across, I've been steeped in researching paranormal for the last 3 years, just because I've been retired for 3 years. One of the things I've come across since I started doing podcasting is cryptid stories about little people. Do you have any stories like that? Do you have a favorite story? Can you share something like that with us if you do?
Well, there are so many different types of diminutive people or diminutive creatures all across this country and Canada. It's hard to even choose one, and they range from they're very different in nature often too. I mean, you can go everywhere from people who are obviously people. They're just little people, as we use the term today, that once perhaps might have worked in a sideshow or something like that. Now they're thankfully more integrated into society, and don't need to do that during their living anymore. But at one time, there were many of these little people who worked with circuses and sideshows, and then the idea is that they quit and formed their own little colonies where they could live and be undisturbed, and in the Weird USA series, I did Weird Michigan and then co-authored Weird Wisconsin too, but Florida and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, many other states all have these places called, they're sort of like fabled little people colonies. And the one in Wisconsin is called Haunchyville, and they call the people the Haunchies. I have no idea where that name came from. And they have a legend that if you go trespass on their land, which is by Little Muskego Lake, believe it or not, on a road called Mystic Drive, that first you'll be warned by a regular-sized man driving in a black pickup truck and with a shotgun will warn you to leave. And if you don't, then all the Haunchy people come out of the cornfields with little shovels and rakes and things, and and baseball clubs, and beat you up. And I've heard from somebody who swears that he had an encounter, and other people that have. I don't really know how to explain those completely, except that they're very different than what you hear from Native American people, which is probably the biggest other source of the little people stories. And there they range from very small, furry-looking things to creatures that really quite resemble European-style elves and that sort of thing. They even down to having the pointy hats. And then there are some. If you go to the shores of Lake Superior along a certain stretch in northern Wisconsin, there is a native reserve that has these very odd geological formations. They're perfectly spherical little stones called concretions, and they're supposedly made by the actions of wind and water on certain types of minerals. And I actually own one of them. And they supposedly also all belong, and probably legally do belong to the tribe. One of these days I'm going to drive up there and return mine to wherever it came from. But what they say about these, and this is called the Bad River Reservation, and they say that they believe that these round forms were all made by the Creator, each bestowed with its own little soul, and that each one is a living being, and that sometimes they can manifest as these very tiny people. And to take them and have them away from their habitat is not supposed to be a good thing. So I had a story about that in the Weird Wisconsin book about a man who collected many, many, many of them and actually set up a museum for them north of Madison. I don't believe that it exists any longer. He was quite elderly, and that was some years ago. But it just kind of shows you how different each of these can be. My favorite name is the Pukwudgie. I just think that's the best name ever.
Pukwudgie.
The Pukwudgie. Okay. The Pukwudgie is a name for a small, kind of a tiny version of Midwestern Native Americans. I think that name best is applied, or mostly is applied, around the Great Lakes states, and then some farther south. I know Kentucky has the Pukwudgies, and over toward the more eastern states. And they are supposed to be people that, if you see them, you don't look them in the eye. You stand respectfully. You back up, because they can be nice. They can do you a good turn. But if you are too insolent with them, not respectful enough, or you do something they don't like, they can also make your life very difficult. And there are different stories of their appearance and different stories of what they do tribe to tribe to tribe, but in general, that's the one that I hear the most.
Oh, wow. So
and that's not all.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
I'll mention one other one, and this is that from time to time, people will give me a dogman report that is of a mini dogman, like, say, maybe 3 feet tall or so, walking around. And I've had several of those. One of the best was in Winneconne, which is near Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where a couple of young men were bicycling along a lake path that runs through there, and they encountered one of these 3 foot tall or less, perfectly formed, on his hind legs, looked like a miniature werewolf, and it was sort of dodging in and around the trees as if it was sort of teasing them, playing a game with them. They thought maybe it was a young one. I've had several reports in different places of people who see first a large bipedal wolf-like creature and then 2 or 3 small ones. So they presume that it's, a mother with puppies.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there's no way to know for sure, but and other people have just encountered the single ones in the woods. I had one man very, very early on, back in the early 90s,